I'm Chris Thiry, the Map and GIS Librarian at the Colorado School of Mines. This presentation will be about my research on the history of race-based real estate developments in Jefferson County, Colorado. I will show you examples of my findings and the website I created. Before I begin, I must recognize and thank Rhonda Frazier, Jefferson County Archivist, who has been a tremendously helpful partner in this project. I want to add that, at times, I will quote historic documents which contain arcane and offensive language. I do not use these terms to offend or shock. I am quoting historic documents so that you will understand the words people used at the time the documents were created. The goal of this presentation is to shed light on our past. It is very human of all of us to think that bad behaviors and even malicious intent are things that other people do in other places. Not here, not my people, is a common refrain throughout history. Sadly, bad actors and actions and horrible consequences of past events can be found throughout the world, and actions taken decades ago still have bearing on our life today. The topic of racist policies and actions within real estate in the United States has been discussed for more than 100 years. Here's a quick history of racism in covenants in U.S. real estate. Forever and a day, people have been telling other people where they can and cannot live. The reasons are the usual suspects: race, religion, ethnicity, and even marital status. Starting in the late 1800s, but not catching on until the early 1900s, forms of discrimination in real estate ownership and occupancy in the USA became codified, written into legal documents. After the Supreme Court struck down race-based ordinances in 1917 in Buchanan versus Worley, people began to include race-based exclusionary language into neighborhood covenants. Covenants, usually titled restrictive covenants in real estate, are legally binding statements associated with an individual property or entire neighborhood. Today, many of us are familiar with covenants that limit what color you can paint your house. In 1926, in Corrigan versus Buckley, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that such clauses in covenants were legal and could be backed by the law and law enforcement. However, on May 3, 1948, in Shelley versus Kramer, the Supreme Court struck down race-based covenants. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act dealt with many inequities under the law. The 1968 Fair Housing Act outlawed discrimination in real estate practices. But the problems of racism in real estate and housing still exist, and the legacy of its formal legal practices are deep and impact our society to this day. I started my research with the plats held by the Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder. Plats are maps of developments, new neighborhoods or subdivisions, and are created for property owners by surveyors or engineers for the purpose of subdividing the land and selling it into lots. The plats were signed and approved by county officials, the planning board, and county commissioners. I searched all the plats of Jefferson County from the 1860s to 1950. I examined approximately 1,000 documents and found about 200 plats with protective covenants or something similar. Sadly, 85% or so of the 200 plats had race-based restrictions on their covenants. Starting in the mid-1940s, almost all the plats did. Despite the Supreme Court ruling them illegal in June 1948, it wasn't until February 1950 that the race-based language disappeared from real estate covenants in Jefferson County. The plats tell many stories and have a lot of information. This is a great example of what an older plat looks like. Goodhart Stoddard Subdivision is on the northeast corner of Garrison and 32nd. The original map was drawn by hand by a surveyor or engineer. The plat shows property boundaries and new roads. It also shows the dimensions of the properties. Most plats have the following: the clerk and recorder's filing numbers, and sometimes the page and book number, title and legal geographic description, dedication, this tells you who the owners are, plus their signatures, notary acknowledgement, protective covenants, and this is where you find the race-based exclusionary language, engineer's certificate, usually of a surveyor or an engineer, and finally the approvals by the Planning Commission, Board of Commissioners, and Clerk and Recorders. All those contain signatures and have official seals. Plats cover both small and large developments. The Wilmore Subdivision from 1947 on the left has 5 lots, while the West Alameda Heights Subdivision in 1947 has 304 lots. Here's what the race-based exclusionary language looks like on the plats. The statements almost always use the same phrases. Remember, these were legal documents backed by the power of the government, signed by government officials. There are 2 versions of race-based exclusionary language on the plats: inclusionary and exclusionary. Inclusionary says who is allowed to live there. This example is from the Glenda Subdivision, 1946, and the plat says, quote, "No person of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot. This covenant shall not, however, prevent such use or occupancy by domestic servants of a different race domiciled with or in the employment of a white owner or tenant." The exclusionary language looks like this, and it says who is not allowed to live there. This is from the North Lakewood Heights plat map from 1939. Quote, "No tract shall at any time be occupied by any person or persons of Mongolian or Negro races. However, this shall not prohibit the employment of persons of such races on their premises by the occupants." Unquote. These clauses were struck down as unenforceable in 1948. However, to this day, they remain on the documents held by the county. In order to make clear that the race-based statements are illegal now, all the documents with race-based language have the following stamp. Quote, "Restrictive or prohibitive covenants which contain any specification limiting the transfer, rental, or lease of any housing because of race, creed, religion, color, sex, marital status, national origin or ancestry, or handicap, or other like classifications may be prohibited by state and federal laws." Other races, ethnicities, and religions were often singled out in restrictions. In the 5th subdivision of Indian Hills, in the main part of the restrictions, the owners allow Indians as well as Caucasians to own and occupy properties. However, in subparagraph 1, they say the occupants can only be Caucasian, so I don't know which statement is correct. The 1939 Upland Acres subdivision says that members of both Mongolian or Negro races may not live there. Mongolian was a catch-all term used to describe Asian Americans. In various parts of the country, people were excluded for national origin, such as being from, quote, "the former Ottoman Empire," unquote. In Fresno, Arizona, that meant no Armenians allowed. In other parts of the country, it meant other things. The motivations of people at the time are difficult to determine. I found one onerous example. In this 1945 map of Kincaid Springs subdivision, the statement regarding race was added later in a different handwriting. Clearly, this is a conscientious choice. but in most cases, it is not so obvious. Because the language was so standard from document to document, it begs me to wonder, were the people just mindlessly copying things out of a book? Were they aware and conscious of the race-based exclusionary language? Why can I find some subdivisions without these clauses? Were these people forgetful or altruistic? Or did the absence of race-based restrictions merely recognize the reality of the moment, that African Americans were already living in the area? Without much more research, this will be difficult to know. I'm about to show you some screenshots of what I've created after examining the plats of Jefferson County. After downloading the scans of the plats, I identified the areas they cover and extracted some language and other facts. Using a geographic information system, GIS, I mapped all the subdivisions and attached some of the ancillary information. And I created this website. These are screenshots. A link to the websites can be found in the description of this video. This website is free to use by everyone. There's nothing to sign into. It is a bigger site, so on small pipes it may be a bit slow. The maps of the neighborhoods are not available through my website. Remember, this map shows only the subdivisions or developments with covenants or restrictions that were developed from the 1910s to 1950s, and it does not show individual properties. It is also important to know that the race-based exclusionary clauses in real estate did exist in Jefferson County, Colorado, and that the clauses were legally binding at the time. The live website is interactive, and you can move around the map and scroll in and out. The red areas are those that had some sort of race-based restrictions in their covenants. The green polygons do not have the language. The varying shades indicate some overlaps of data. If you click on a shaded polygon, you will get a pop-up box. These display the name of the subdivision, its date, the race-related text, property owners, surveyor or engineers, mortgagee, and the clerk and recorder number. The subdivision maps themselves are not online at this time. Here are some of the known gaps in my research. Most importantly, I do not have any human stories about historic racism in housing and real estate in Jefferson County. I've not been able to find census data for anything other than the county as a whole. I can tell you what the population of the county was in 1920, but not what the population was of Golden or Arvada. My attempts to find information about the history of race relations in Jefferson County have yielded little. I have evaluated only a few individual deeds to see if they include race-based exclusionary language. Most of the ones I examined did not have the language. Some merely referred to the covenants. I am totally unfamiliar with the laws, histories, codes, statutes, etc. in real estate. I've not examined newspapers and city directories for housing announcements or advertisements. And lastly, I've yet to talk to and examine many city government and historical society records. This topic, like so many, brings up uncomfortable truths about our past. We all like to think that the people who came before us acted always in a just and noble way, but we know that is not true. We also like to think that we ourselves act in just and noble ways. Sadly, we all fall short of our ideals. What I worry about with this topic is that it will be too easily misunderstood. That the discussion of this topic will lead to actual or perceived accusations and blaming of individuals who had nothing to do with or little power to change events that happened decades ago. Some of my main goals with this project are to document and shed light on our past. Sadly, systemic racism exists throughout our country. These covenants with race-based exclusionary language were enacted in all corners of our land, including right here in Jefferson County, Colorado. My fondest hope is that the knowledge generated from this project can be used to make this a more perfect union with liberty and justice for all. In the description part of this video, you will find ways to contact me and links to my website, which also contains some resources and readings. I welcome any questions or suggestions you might have regarding my project. Thank you.